What if being silent was a tactic rather than a sign of surrender? What if a broken and forgotten slave was buried deeper than seeds? Within days, 7 overseers and 1 harvest feast perished. A coincidence or a curse that has been building. For decades, Abeni was who? And what had she roused in Georgia's fields? A story that has never been recorded in history books is about to be told to you. Would you really want to recall what they attempted to forget? If, to ensure you don't miss any of our investigations, subscribe to the channel right once, and enable notifications if you want to follow true stories that defy time and uncover hidden realities, all the cries that were absorbed by the harvest rhythm. That year was 1843, and the Berrysville plantation loomed like a kingdom carved out of cruelty, with terror rather than fences defining its boundaries. Ani, a lady, labored among the rows of sugarcane that were hunched over in the sun. She didn't say much. When her voice was heard, bore the burden of lost memories and faraway shores. According to some, she was born in the center of Africa. The overseers referred to her as the ghost, and she passed through the days with eyes that never rose and hands that never trembled. They assumed she was broken. Others whispered, she had once been free in Brazil, stolen across the sea when war made men greedy. Wherever truth lived, it had long been buried beneath the scarred skin on her back and the silence she wore like mourning. However, a storm slept behind that silence. Abeni was not alone. Hundreds of people were like her in the fields, with black bodies forced into labor, names changed to numbers, and children raised only to be sold. However, one of them, Elijah, did not bend so easily. He was young, sharp-eyed, and constantly watching. Where others accepted, he calculated. Where others endured, he questioned. And even though his voice was soft, it reached Abeni like the low. Their hands were soaked with years of violence, but once a year they put aside their lashes and gathered for the harvest festival, a night of music, wine, and meat carved by those they chained. There were 7 overseers, 7 men who ruled the slaves like gods, each cruel in his own way. Mr. Carroll, the oldest, preferred the whip as a sermon, and Mr. Bainbridge, the youngest, hunted runaways with a smile. No one recalled that she had once been a healer, that her mother's mother knew roots that twisted sickness into silence. They saw only a quiet woman with tired eyes and calloused hands. With tension in the air, the festival preparations began, and Ani was called to the kitchens. She accepted without a word, and Elijah passed her that morning, their shoulders nearly touching. He said nothing, but in his gaze there. The ground held its breath. The sugarcane swayed under a wind too warm for comfort. The ground held its breath, and somewhere, Abeni stirred the pot slowly, her fingers brushing the pouch hidden beneath her apron, stitched carefully into the fabric like a prayer she wasn't ready to say aloud. The distant drums began to echo, faint and hollow, and would grow louder with the passing days, pulsing through the night like a second heartbeat beneath the land. But names are among the first to rot under chains. Her real name, her first one, had been taken the moment her daughter's neck snapped in the manor courtyard. 3 winters passed, and they said the girl had stolen bread. Abeni never saw her. Before Berrysville, there was another name spoken in a tongue that no longer lived in these fields. Ani once carried it like a talisman wrapped in memory and salt water. The other slaves gave her space, some out of respect, others out of superstition, and silence in that place had weight, and hers pressed on the skin like unseen hands. Elijah, on the other hand, was not afraid of silence, and he walked among it as if it were music he alone could hear. Body, just the sound it made when it hit the dust. Since that morning, Ani had not spoken a word to any white man. This was not because she was defiant, but rather because grief had engulfed her language. The next evening, he returned and spoke. In riddles and half-truths, like someone testing the edge of a knife before deciding where to cut, but Annie didn't listen with her ears. He approached her in the dim light of the smokehouse, not with pity or arrogance, just curiosity, and he asked about the pouch she kept, the one she never let out of her sight. She didn't say anything, but her grip on it tightened ever so slightly. The overseers were becoming restless. One had beaten a boy almost to death for coughing during prayers, and another had broken a woman's fingers for spilling molasses. Their anger was growing, not out of necessity but out of indulgence. She did not trust Elijah, but she recognized something in him, the power of things buried in the ground, the chants of midwives, and the smell of wet clay after rain. The harvest festival was approaching, and there were whispers in the slave. Quarters that the overseers were making a new toast that Abeni would cook for them. She was called forward once more to the manor's back kitchen, and this time she did not object. Taking her time as she passed the tree where her daughter had died, the bark still bearing the rope scars. No one else seemed to notice them. She went into the kitchen to find Elijah waiting by the firewood. He left before she could say anything, leaving a small bundle on the table with dried mushrooms that were black as coal and a red root strip. She didn't touch them yet. That night, in the silence of her room, Abeni opened her pouch and discovered seeds wrapped in cloth that had been passed down from a long line of women. The day came without ceremony, with no thunder in the sky, no tremor in the earth, just the unrelenting sun rising over a land that had forgotten how to hope. The harvest festival was to start at dusk, when the air cooled enough for white men to pretend the world was theirs by divine design. She laid them out in a row as one might with bones, each with a name only she knew. Outside, the cane rustled, beneath a moon that refused to shine. Abeni was assigned to the kitchen once more, and no one questioned it. She moved with precision, her silence taken for obedience, and the mistress of the house handed her a battered recipe book and pointed toward the pot, which contained stew, pork, corn, red pepper, and okra, a dish that both slaves were familiar with. In the fields, the slaves worked in double rhythm, told to finish early and clean themselves for display. The music would come later with the meat, the cider, and the appearance of civility. The men drank on the porch, boasting of yields, discipline, and lineage. 7 of them wore linen, each with a silver pin on his collar. They had names, but none were worth remembering. Their power lay not in who they were, but in what they stood for, permanence. Abeni made the stew slowly and deliberately, the fire beneath it, and master, though only one ever ate it with a full belly. No overseer entered the kitchen that was left to the women and the slaves. Whispered to her in her grandmother's tongue, the words that were never written only breathed into bone. She added the onions, the salt, and the bay leaves, and silence had always been Annie's armor, and no one asked questions because everyone was too busy peeling, chopping, and scrubbing. The stew was ready by the time the sun kissed the horizon, and the servants carried out trays of smoked ham, boiled, greens, and cornbread. Abeni followed with the pot, heavy in her arms, and the smell made the porch laugh. One of the overseers referred to her as the quiet one and waved her away with the back of his hand. Without replying, she bowed slightly and went back to the kitchen where she scrubbed until her knuckles cracked and washed her hands with lye. She watched from the window as the men piled their plates high, served themselves, and toasted each, other with glasses of spiced rum. Elijah stood among the musicians, drum in hand, his eyes never leaving the fire. The night fell slowly and thickly, and the songs started off as rudimentary hymns to harvest and legacy. Off in the background, the Abeni sat by the hearth, eyes closed, lips moving soundlessly, not in triumph, not yet, but in remembrance, as the moon, pale and brittle, climbed over the cane fields, and in the shadows between the drums and the torches, a first cough crept through. A dry sound that could be easily covered by laughter, followed by another, heavier one. The first fell before dawn, and the youngest, Mr. Bainbridge, was discovered curled at the base of the porch steps. His skin turned the color of spoiled milk, his eyes wide, his hands clutching his gut as if he were trying to hold something in, and vomit streaking across his collar. The others dismissed it as drink. Too much rum, too little water. The doctor came from a nearby town, muttering about infection, but no one could explain how 7 healthy men had started to deteriorate, within hours of the same meal. By mid-morning, however, Mr. Carroll complained of a fever, and he barked orders from his bed, his voice cracking and his mouth dry. By the time dusk fell again, 2 more overseers had gone to their beds, trembling, their tongues too swollen to speak, their mouths dry. Elijah worked quietly. His tasks doubled now that the overseers had disappeared from the fields, and he spoke to no one, not even Abeni, but at night, when the drums stopped and the slaves moved cautiously, eyes down, hearts pounding. Retribution often came without reason, and to celebrate too soon was to tempt the lash. Whispers spread through the quarters like smoke through rafters. The doctor came back 3 times in 1 week, bringing nothing but confusion and leeches, warning of spoiled meat, foul air, and curses from distant lands. One of the overseers, delirious with fever, accused a child of witchcraft, and the boy was dragged into the clearing and whipped until his back split open. Only the insects were left, and he stood beneath the same tree every evening, hands behind his back, waiting for something that never came. Elijah was taken next, and it was never made clear who had come for him in the night with rough hands and lanterns, claiming that he had poisoned the stew, that he had been seen near the kitchen, and that his presence near the musicians was suspicious. He did not fight back, did not scream when they beat him, and did not cry out when they tied him to the whipping post. He barely made it through. Benny stitched the wounds herself in silence, the needle trembling only once. Stared past them, eyes fixed on something invisible, something far away. They left him there for 3 days without food or water, and on the 4th day he passed away. Abeni did not go to the funeral. There was no funeral. The overseers kept falling one by one, their bodies disintegrating gradually and methodically. It was not a quick end. Rather, it was a period of decay punctuated by fits, hallucinations, and blistering skin. No one dared look her in the eye, even the mistress avoided her. The doctor refused to return. The plantation master wrote letters, but no one responded. By the 7th silence, only Abeni was left unaltered. She worked as usual, cleaning linens, mending shirts, and serving tea to hands that now trembled too much to hold the cup. Something in Abeni had changed, not in anger, but in stillness, as if she had become a vessel emptied of pain, left only with... They sold her quietly, without ceremony or notice, and the mistress watched from the doorway as Abeni was loaded. Into a wagon headed south, her wrists bound with coarse rope, her name scratched onto a ledger with indifferent ink. No questions asked, no accusations spoken. In the fields, the cane grew tall, uncut, unharvested, and the land itself seemed to hesitate, unsure whether it should remember or forget. The new plantation was smaller and more reclusive. Its owner, Mrs. Delaney, was a widow who wore mourning armor. She spoke softly and drank heavily, her estate held together by the hands of 20 slaves and the weight of old debts. Abeni was put to work in the garden, away from the house, far from eyes that might wonder. Her face was pale, her jaw clenched, her eyes not meeting hers, perhaps out of guilt, fear, or both, wrapped in silence. Ani did not speak to the others at first. She kept her pouch, which had survived the search, hidden deep within her clothing, sewn into a fold that no white hand dared to examine too closely. Inside were the seeds, dry, black, and dormant, along with a strip of red cloth from her daughter's dress, folded like a prayer. She never opened it in the light, only at night when the wind whispered in long-buried tongues and the stars blinked like forgotten spirits. She saw the signs, a limp here, a scar there, a girl with her voice caught in her throat. They said Mrs. Delaney had a brother who came once a month carrying a whip stitched with copper, leaving behind silence and bruises no one could explain. The slaves here were more subdued, more resigned, and walked with the stillness of people already buried. The ground grew cold, the cane fields slept under frost, but Abeni planted in the garden beneath the bitter root and rosemary. It was not flowers or vegetables, but seeds that had traveled across oceans and were tucked in the hair of women who did not survive. She planted them slowly and carefully, one by one, using her hands rather than her mouth to speak, and she sang once, low and almost unintelligible, a song no one else knew from a place without a map. Abeni harvested it reverently, dried it in the sun, and ground it to dust. She waited until the first root sprouted in silence, twisted, pale, and veined like old skin. Mrs. Delaney became ill one morning, first with a cough and tremble, then with fever, muttering, and visions. She called out for her dead husband, clawed at the walls, and refused food. A doctor was called, but no remedy was found. The slaves were told to stay indoors. Abeni was not called. Mrs. Delaney died 3 nights later. The brother returned intoxicated and enraged, hitting 3 slaves before breakfast and breaking a man's leg by noon. But his anger was short-lived. He, too, started to deteriorate. His hands trembled. His eyes turned yellow. He locked himself in the smokehouse, ranting at shadows. No master ever went back to that land, and when the wind blew just right, it brought with it the subtle smell of fire and herbs, and something older, something watching, something waiting. By the end of the week, the house was deserted, and no one knew where Abeni had gone. Some said they saw her walking barefoot through the fields, head high, seeds spilling from her hands, while others said they saw her walking barefoot through the fields, head high, with roots cracking stone.